they're renaming the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to the Wolverine Hub of Opportunity, Persistence, and Excellence. Uh, I think the word persistence is the key word there. Um,
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Monday, March 31st. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, all eyes are on Wisconsin right now. There's an election for a seat on the state Supreme Court set for April 1st. Latest polls show a slight lead for the Democratic candidate, whose name is Susan Crawford, over Republican Brad Schimmel. So, Tom, what's at stake here, and why all the interest in Wisconsin?
Well, the Wisconsin Supreme Court it's a 4-3 majority for the liberals. They just had a battle, not too long ago, where the liberal ended up winning and tipping the balance in favor of liberals. And so, this is a chance for conservatives to sort of win back the court. Look, Wisconsin is the quintessential, outside of Obama's two elections in 08 and 12, it has been on a razor's edge more than any other state. And again, not just in the presidential races, but these Supreme Court races have been a great example. And both parties have done, a huge mobilization efforts. I mean, $100 million has been spent. It's just absolutely mind-blowing on a judiciary, shattering records by miles and miles and miles. So both sides see this as an important sort of proxy battle for the first half of the Trump administration. And obviously Elon Musk is heavily involved. He's contributed like $11 million to Schimmel's campaign and held a rally there the other day, which, he's generated a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of people turned out, and also generated a lot of, folks who are anti-Elon Musk. And they're using that to try and pull the lever on this campaign and get people to turn out. Turnout will be high for a special election and a judicial election, not as high as the presidential. And that's what's concerning Republicans, as we just talked about in these races down in Florida. I mean, Trump brings in a lot of folks and has brought in a lot of folks who are not traditional voters. And so, when these elections happen, when Trump's not on the ballot or it's a down ballot race, can they get folks to turn out? Can they impart to them how important it is? Because Democrats are certainly, I think, motivated and ready to turn out on April Fool's Day, by the way.
Yeah, right. Well, Carl, Musk is, I guess, trying to repeat what he did in Pennsylvania. He was there over the weekend, and he's got this, it's a kind of a gimmick, I guess, but he hands out $1 million checks. He handed out 2 of them to people who signed his petition. As Tom points out, I mean, he's kind of become a more divisive figure than he did even just last November. What do you make of Elon's? Is he a plus or a negative for Republicans this time around?
Andy, that's the interesting question, because Donald Trump himself is a turnout machine. And when he's on the ballot, he turns out more people in favor of him, at least recently in the last election, than are against him. But when he's not on the ballot, it seems like the Democrats still hate him as much as if he were on the ballot. So they're going to go vote against anything they think he might be associated with. While the Republicans, the Trump, the MAGA voters, they don't make the connection as easily. Well, Trump's not on the ballot. Elon Musk is trying to implant in the minds of Wisconsin voters, no, he actually is on the ballot. And why is this one seat so important? I mean, as Tom said, Tom was being polite, conservative judges and liberal judges. No, these are Democratic judges and Republican judges. The courts have become partisan and polarized. And every time some good government, liberal wrings their hands and says Trump is wreaking havoc with the courts, yeah, I tend to agree with that. But the courts have wreaked havoc on themselves. And these partisan decision after partisan decision, you can almost guess the way a case is going to go these days in U.S. district courts by who appointed that judge. And that's not what the founders had in mind, believe me. So when people start talking about the separation of powers, the legislative branch, the executive branch, now the judicial branch, they just become completely partisan. And that's not healthy. And it's also not healthy to have $100 million, most of it, overwhelming majority, from out of state, not from people who live in Wisconsin who want an impartial judge to decide, what the Wisconsin Constitution requires of the Wisconsin legislature. Nobody gives a damn about any of that. It's all about national politics. And, you and I have talked about this before, Andy. Tip O'Neill used to say all politics is local. Well, he came from a different era. Today,
Yeah.
all politics is national.
It does seem that way. $100 million. It's hard for me to imagine how you spend $100 million on this kind of a race in Wisconsin. I mean, maybe in New York, maybe in, Chicago, maybe in Philadelphia. But I mean, it's not, that's a lot of money to pour into a state like Wisconsin. And I'm just wondering, what does that tell us about the state of national politics?
It tells us that, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of money that are politically engaged and willing to give their money. Because you're right. I mean, and I've talked about this before, and particularly in Wisconsin, they've had a lot of high profile races there. They had this, when Scott Walker was the governor, they tried to recall him, I believe, and that was a huge race. Tons and tons of money were spent by labor unions because he was against the public unions in Wisconsin, and that was a real flashpoint. And
remember, Tom, they invaded the Capitol. This time you didn't hear about it because it was Democrats, not
that's right,
not Republicans. That was the first Capitol invasion we had. The Wisconsin State Capitol.
I do remember that. Yeah.
But the point is, look, money is important in politics to a certain point, and then you reach the point of diminishing returns, right? It's important for running some ads and certainly for organizing on the ground. But I mean, at some point, you can only run so many ads, and you can only have so many volunteers, and $100 million seems pretty excessive for a judicial race in
seems
in a state where
obscene, actually.
Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about judges and the courts, judiciary is important, as we've been saying. And Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, he's introduced a bill today, I think, that would rein in federal judges and curtail their ability to block at least Donald Trump's executive orders. This has been coming for a while. Carl, he claims that over the past 2 months alone, judges have issued at least 15 injunctions against the administration, surpassing the 14 that President Biden faced throughout his 4-year term. So this is a pretty interesting piece of legislation. Does it have any chance of getting anywhere? And is he right about judges overreaching their authority?
Well, it's beginning to seem that way to a lot of people. What Grassley's bill would do, it would make a U.S. District Court judge, and he would issue an injunction. And he's you find some judge in Honolulu. This happened in Trump's first term. No, there can't be a Muslim ban. Who is this judge? I never heard of him. And it would restrict it to that district. It wouldn't have national application. And in a way, it doesn't now, because it gets appealed, and then the districts, the appellate districts, sometimes have different decisions on the same point of law. Those cases have to either be resolved by the Supreme Court, or the law will be different in those different districts. And what Grassley's trying to say is that we don't want basically local judges. Now, they're federal judges, but they're locally based, making national policy, ruling on a national issue, that they would then be required to rule, about the case in front of them. So a student grabbed off the street in Boston, Tufts University, let's say Tufts University, just to throw out a hypothetical.
Right, yeah.
And the judge would say, the local judge in Boston, you can't do that. Okay. Now, leave aside the point that the Trump administration has just been ignoring these rulings, which is a whole another problem in the other direction. What Grass would say, okay, but then a judge in New Mexico or Texas isn't bound by that decision. That's a local decision on one case. I think it has a chance of, it may have a chance of passing. The Democrats may want to filibuster it. If Mike Johnson can get every single one of his, he's got a two-person majority now. Every one of his members there could probably pass the House. Trump would certainly sign it. If they're going to do it, I've been saying they should do it. They should try and do it now before Hakeem Jeffries is the speaker in 2 years, and they have no chance of getting it passed.
Tom, what do you make of Grassley's idea?
I think it's a good idea. Look, this is a problem, and we've seen, Article 2, which establishes Congress, comes into conflict with Article 3, and we've been talking a lot about the Constitution. I mean, as you point out, Grassley says 15 universal injunctions against Trump in the first 2 months of his administration. 2/3 of all of them have been against Trump. So just since 2016. And he says in this article, legal scholars can find no record of any universal injunction prior to 1963. So this is a new phenomenon. It is becoming an increasingly common phenomenon. And the way it's been going, it's all been sort of mostly in one direction. And that is why I think a lot of people are worried that the judiciary is damaging itself, and that somebody needs to step in. And so Chuck Grassley is filling the breach here by putting forth this amendment. Will Democrats sign on to it? I agree with Carl. I mean, maybe he can get through the House, and it just comes down to, Chuck Schumer just took a lot of heat from progressives for not shutting down the government. And so I would think that he would be probably, very inclined to filibuster this thing, if only to show that he's, got some spine and willing to stand up to the administration. But I could be wrong. I mean, we'll see. Maybe he's got some Democrats. Maybe there are some Democrats, enough Democrats who, like Fetterman and a couple others who think that, this actually, because this is one of those slippery slopes you get on. And it's like, well, at some point, Democrats are going to be in power again. And how are they going to feel if Republican judges are issuing universal injunctions against their policies and impinging on the executive prerogative of their presidents? Maybe that's a case that they'll listen to.
Yeah. Well, it reminded me, Chuck Grassley is 91 years old. He was young, I guess I should say. So
he was still jogging down the highways of Iowa up until a couple of years ago. I mean, he's pretty remarkable.
When he ran, you remember him doing the push-ups. I don't know if you remember that video.
Strom Thurmond used to do that. It gives us all hope that we can be golfing when we're 90, guys.
That's right. Well, good.
Shooting our age, Carl.
Yeah, right. All right, well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And gentlemen, Trump told NBC's Kristen Walker on the phone call over the weekend that he's, quote, not joking about running for a third term. He said it was too early to think about it, but he did say, and this is the quote, that there were methods to do so if he wanted to. So, Tom, is this the kind of thing that gets people's heads to explode, at least inside the Beltway? Is it making your head explode?
Yes. Well,
Tom's head explodes that we're even talking about it.
Just to give a little peek behind the curtain, we have our editorial meetings in the morning. We get on and we talk about what subjects we want to talk about. And this subject was brought up, and I said, we're going to take the bait. We're actually going to talk about this. This is exactly what, everybody's doing. I mean, speaking of heads exploding, Morning Joe, I think, lost their marbles this morning over this. Look, it's clearly not going to happen. The method for doing so is amending the U.S. Constitution, which isn't going to happen. But as I said earlier, look, I think, for a lot of folks, including the folks on the left, they should take this as a sign of progress. I mean, Trump was going to be, this last election was the last election we'd ever have in America. He was just going to be a dictator. And now he's at least saying he's willing to stand for election for a third term. So I guess that's progress. That's a good thing, right?
Well, he didn't really say that, did he, Andy, that he'd stand for election? He just said he was thinking of a third term.
He said run for a third term.
Maybe he could just appoint himself.
That's not running.
Well, Carl, is this just high-level trolling? Because it does cause people to go into conniptions.
Well, I'd say two things about that. The first is that there a constitutional gray area? President, the constitutional amendment limiting a president to 2 terms is always understood in the legislative history to be 2 consecutive terms. This guy goes and pulls a Grover Cleveland and comes back. So when he says that methods, I thought, are they going to start doing what they did with birthright citizenship? Just start talking about the constitutional amendment in a way that nobody's ever understood before, but maybe there's some wiggle room. That's the first thing I thought. The second thing I thought is Trump's not, maybe he's trolling. Maybe he's just, he joked about Canada being the 51st state and ended Justin Trudeau's reign as the leader of a foreign country. So maybe he is trolling because he's successful at it. But all I think he's actually doing is something a little more serious than that, and a little more sophisticated. And I may be giving him too much credit, but here's my thought. Presidents, our second-term presidents are lame ducks by definition, by the constitutional amendment we've been talking about, which, by the way, the Democrats did do. Well, I won't go into the history. Anyway, so the idea here, Republicans did it in Congress because of Franklin Roosevelt. And guess what? It cost Dwight Eisenhower a third term. So, these things do backfire, and there's a long history of that. But what I think Trump's doing is trying to tell people I'm going to be around. I'm not a lame duck. As long as he holds this out as a possibility, he wants to do two things. Mainly, he wants to keep the Republicans in line on Capitol Hill. Some of these senators might look, John Thune, I got a 6-year term, you got a 4-year term. Trump wants to, sort of nip that and that kind of thinking in the bud. He wants to have out there the possibility he's still going to be there. So they have to keep doing what he wants. That was my thought.
Wow. Four-dimensional chess there, Tom.
I was
what do you
going to
think?
say, this is the first time Carl's ever given the old 4-dimensional chess by Trump argument. I'm stunned by it, quite frankly. Well done, Carl.
Well, there is I don't know if it was Steve Bannon who floated this idea, but I think Walker might have made a mention of this, that the idea that Vance would run at the top of the ticket, Trump would be run as vice president, and then they would switch after they won the election. Tom?
Well, that's what happened in Russia with Medvedev. What's his name? How do you pronounce
Medvedev?
his name? Yeah,
Medvedev,
and Putin.
yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
What happened?
He was the figurehead.
Yeah.
So
I will transmit to Vladimir. That was... JD will be sitting in.
you think JD would?
I'll transmit to Trump.
Yeah. Do you think JD would do that, Tom?
No, I mean, now we're really like off the
Trump
rails.
thinks this is all whiskey
stuff.
talk.
I know.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about.
I'm not taking that bait.
Okay. Well, let's talk about something else then, which is more serious, I think, which is the Trump tariffs. Wednesday is what are we calling it? Liberation
Day.
He's going to announce what tariffs are actually going to go into effect. Lots of uncertainty over the next 48 hours. Carl, how much does the president have riding on these tariffs? Because this may keep any Republican out of the White House 3 years from now.
I call it go buy a Japanese truck today, pickup truck today day, because that's what I'm calling it. I've never got the idea of these tariffs. President Trump has fallen in love with the revenue that they bring in, and they do bring in revenue. And I think you see what's happened with Elon Musk and Doge. They're keeping tally. They're keeping the books. They inherited a $2 trillion deficit. They're trying to cut it in half. They think this is one way they can do that. The other thing that President Trump talks about a lot is to encourage investment here, to build cars and trucks in the United States. The problem with that is become a global industry, and even trucks, Toyota trucks that are assembled here, the motors are built, Taiwan, Mexico, Japan. It's a really global and international industry, and there's a fear that he's interfering with the prime directive, which is to get those cars and trucks off the assembly line, as quickly and as possible, as low cost as possible. The president sort of said, I don't know how directly he said this, but I've inferred that he's saying, well, yeah, prices are going to go up, but I don't really care about that. You'll get right now, you'll get a tax break for one thing. Your taxes will go down. Some of these costs will go up, but then there'll be a shakeout period. And then, millions more Americans will be working in the manufacturing sector. And, it sounds a little bit like Make America the 1950s again to me, but he's hell bent on doing it.
Well, I think what he said was he doesn't care if foreign auto prices go up, because that would mean people would be buying more American cars. Tom, I'm pretty sure that was what was read out from that. That was another one of these funny interviews that was done on the phone and reported, and they're So we really don't know what he actually said, but we're just getting.
Well, no, he said what you said, which is ironic because, NBC, I think, sort of misreported their own interview, and a lot of folks yesterday reported that Trump said he couldn't care less if auto prices go up. Well, no, he said if foreign automakers raise their prices, he couldn't care less because that'll just allow people or push people to buy more American cars. And so American-made cars. And so he was seeing it as a net positive, and it was reported as if he doesn't, he could care less. And so,
well, wait, Tom, let me ask you a quick question about that because none of us are economics experts, but one doesn't have to be. If the price of a Toyota Tacoma goes up by 25%, how much do you think the price of a Ford F-150 will go up? Not nothing.
maybe
not zero.
By the way, for those who are listening and viewing, if you haven't picked up on this, Carl's been eyeing a Toyota Tacoma pickup truck
for a long time.
Yeah,
I want to pull the trigger on this one.
I said, why don't you just buy one of the American pickups? No, I got to have the Toyota Tacoma.
I wanted the Jeep after those Bruce Springsteen ads at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, but a friend of mine.
Carl's been itching to have a small pickup truck in suburban Virginia for some time now.
Right, but he really needs one, too.
Yes, which is why he's going to go buy it like as soon as
after
we get off
show.
of this show.
Yeah.
So he can... Look, more broadly speaking, I do think that the tariffs are a real gamble for Trump. They are a real gamble. He's been, holding this out there as sort of as a threat and trying to, get people to do what he wants and modify behaviors and the like. But and there is this thinking within the Trump administration, from Peter Navarro to all of these folks, that the experts are just wrong. They're wrong on tariffs, and they're going to be proven wrong. That is sort of classic Trump to say, I know what I'm doing. I can fix this. The experts don't know anything. And so I'm charting my own course. If he's right, then great. Great for him, great for the Republican Party, great for J.D. Vance and reelections and all that. If he's not, if he's wrong, and the experts actually are right on this, and there's a lot of historical evidence that is, they're basing their opinions on.
It's called the Great Depression.
Then bad for Trump, bad for J.D. Vance, bad for the Republican Party, bad for midterms. Yeah, this is a real high stakes deal that he's engaged here. And it looks like, again, we'll see whether he, carves out and walks back and doesn't go sort of the full Monty with these tariffs as he's talking about doing.
Yeah. Well, there's this new AP NORC poll that came out. 60% disagree with Trump's handling of tariffs right now. 38% approve of his handling of trade with other countries. 40% agree with his handling of the economy overall. And Carl, I'll let you speak in a minute, but I do want to defend Carl. He does own a pickup truck now. I just want people to know that. It's a great truck. I borrow it from time to time out here on the Eastern Shore. So
it's a 2002 Chevy S10.
It's a beauty. It's a beauty. It's a joy to drive. I love it. It's got that truck smell. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Carl, what do you make of those poll numbers? Those don't look very good for Trump if the prices do go up.
Well, yeah, that's right. And look, polls on issues based, 6 months after president gets elected, I take those. You can be a little bit skeptical not because they're wrong, but because voters understand they can send a message to the ruling class, to the president, to the press. And I think what the voters are saying is that they're nervous for the reasons Tom outlined. They're not pulling against this guy, at least not, well, I guess 50% of them are, but that 38%, that's a low number. But what they're saying is they're a little nervous how this is going to come out. They're worried.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We'll be right back with more right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Carl, the Trump administration, has been trying to roll back DEI programs on college campuses. Seems to be working, at least in some cases. The University of Michigan has responded by closing its DEI office and discontinuing what was called DEI 2.0. I can only imagine what that was. That was their strategic plan. So is this a victory for the White House? And is this happening on other campuses as well?
No, it is not a victory because it's not really happening. University of Michigan announced that. And then a couple of days later, in the middle of the night, in very small print, they let it be known that they're actually changing in a memo obtained by somebody administrator at like the Flint campus. They're renaming the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to the Wolverine Hub of Opportunity, Persistence, and Excellence. I think the word persistence is the key word there. And I think that's going to happen in campus. All of what they're doing is they're announcing that they're conforming with the law, with the executive orders of Trump and with the zeitgeist on the right. But they're not doing it. They're not going to fire anybody. They're going to reassign these people. They're going to be a little more careful when they say that, they don't want whites on their campus or whatever they say that, makes the headlines on conservative Twitter. But look, Andy,
you're not buying it.
No, I'm not buying it. We've been talking about this since the Bakke case. There've been Supreme Court decisions for decades going against these schools. They just repackage it, rename it, and accelerate it. Well, that's what they do.
Okay. Well, John Saylor at the Manhattan Institute kind of disagrees with you. He says the Michigan decision is a big, big deal. Michigan was one of those universities that set the tone for the entire country. Other universities look to Michigan and model what they do after Michigan. So, Tom,
that's what they
who's
do.
Right
they model Michigan. They're gonna.
Well, John Saylor knows a thing or two about DEI, but Tom, what do you think?
Well, I mean, Carl might be right. I mean, in Michigan there was some report they spent like $45 million a year on DEI stuff. I mean, it's just, and they have they've hired hundreds and hundreds of administrators. I mean, it's really just a colossal program there. Look, I can tell you, so I was at a conference last week where, and it was off the record, so I can't talk about what was said there, but it was a collection of over 100 presidents and chancellors from universities trying to basically, and the title of the session was called "Restoring Trust in Higher Education," and there is a real sense among the leaders of academia and these universities that they've kind of they've lost trust with the public. That's reflected in the data. It's not some shocking revelation. The question is, what do they do about it, and how do they restore trust? Can they restore trust? And part of that obviously was wrapped up in the Trump administration's efforts against Columbia University, where the acting president just resigned the other day over their inability to sort of protect their Jewish students, and how they had sort of let progressivism and wokeism get out of control, particularly in the humanities faculty at a lot of these universities. And so it's a real deal. And I think university presidents are addressing it. They recognize there's a problem, and they're going to, I think you're going to see more and more of this. I actually disagree with Carl. He might be right in the case of Michigan. They might be, because they're Michigan, they might be just kind of, coming up with different Orwellian names and squeezing the water out of in the balloon so it goes into the other direction and nothing really changes. But I do think there is among a vast majority of folks on leaders on campuses, there is a real effort to try and address what they think has been a shift too far in that direction.
Yeah. Well, the New York Times reported that it's $750 million that Michigan has poured into DEI programs since 2016. So that's a lot of money. Majority, and this is according to the Times, went to salaries and benefits for DEI staff. And they also reported that surveys of students over this period reported a less positive campus climate than at the program's start, and less of a sense of belonging. So, Carl, all points in the direction that maybe these DEI programs not only were a waste of money, but were counterproductive in terms of sort of building campus community.
I agree with that. There was a piece, a very famous piece, Jonathan Chait wrote it, and it's about Michigan. And it was like 20 years ago about how this really started in the 1980s at Michigan. Michigan was sort of a leader in this. It's a dubious distinction. Uh, and but these things are entrenched. When you say things like there's 254 DI administrators, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It infuses every department. Um, this ideology, it's a combination of, it's sort of Marxism and race and gender are exchanged for class. They're old arguments, but repurposed to this end. And it's going to take a lot more than, it's going to take a lot to root this out of the academy. And I don't say it all should be rooted out. To me, it shouldn't just be the dominant ideology.
Right.
There's room for it on a campus, but you'd have to look at the hiring practices, the faculties. The other day we talked about this hapless head of NPR who had to admit that there's 87 registered Democrats on her staff and 0 Republicans. Those ratios exist at every elite college in America, state universities, down to the community college level in California, where I'm from. There is no diversity of thinking on these college campuses. That's what has to change. You have to, for there to be, these students are intimidated. The professors are intimidated by the students. There are all these programs that you can anonymously rat out a professor for, triggering you on something that, especially, and it really, and again, that Jonathan Chait article, I urge people, if they're listening, to go find it. It's around. And people, these are liberal professors who are like quoting W.E.B. Du Bois, and somebody say, "Oh, he said a racist thing." He was quoting one of the great black thinkers in American history, and a black nationalist, by the way, a radical. But it's not enough. And what goes with this is this ignorance of our history, this didactic nature that arguments have to be shut down. DEI is a symbol for all that. It's the tip of the iceberg. But these college campuses, to me, have to get back to reflect really the mosaic of American public opinion. That's
Right.
when people will be free to speak their minds.
And one of the problems is that once an organization, any organization, but in particular, when you talk about college campuses and faculties, once they've been ideologically captured, I mean, all the people who actually hire new professors at universities are faculty staff, right? They're not going to hire, they're going to hire people who they admire, who are like them. They're not going to go hire someone who thinks differently than them. And that's the problem. You've gotten to a point where it's a self-reinforcing thing. And that's why you have these staffs where there are no conservatives. And so how do you reimpose some sort of balance? Do you put a litmus test? Can you do that and say you have to hire conservatives now? That's a tricky thing for a lot of these colleges to work through, but
they don't even know any conservatives, Tom.
Right. But it's clear there has to be some sort of swing back in a more balanced direction, because where they are now is costing them credibility with the public, and ultimately it's hurting these campuses.
Well, there's one more higher education story which I want to talk about, Tom, and you alluded to it, and that's the fact that Columbia University now has their third president in under a year, Katrina Armstrong, who was the interim president. She's going back to the university's medical center. And Claire Shipman, who's a former television reporter, she has the job for now. She was co-chair of the board of trustees. She was once married to Jay Carney, who was President Obama's press secretary, but people probably remember her for her reporting. She was on CNN and a couple of the networks. So, Tom, what do you make of the change? As I said, this is the third person to hold this job in under a year.
Yeah. I mean, my first thought, she's a very accomplished woman. I'm not taking anything away from her. I was kind of shocked to see her name, because I associate her as a
journalist,
journalist and a news.
What do they know?
Not a scholar, which I thought is what universities usually hire as their president. But clearly, Columbia has decided to try something different and go in a different direction. So we'll see. I wish her the best. Look, these jobs are incredibly, incredibly difficult jobs, and particularly if you are trying to institute some sorts of reforms, because there is just this unbelievable ideological capture that's gone on. So I wish her the best of luck. I mean, I we'll see how it goes. Maybe she'll be a huge success. On the other
Yeah.
hand, there's probably even odds that they'll be looking for their fourth president within the next
Well, she
6 months
is
or a year.
interim. She is interim, I should say that. But
Fair
Carl,
enough.
it was we've got about 30 seconds here, but it was a Trump-like move. It seemed to me. You hire someone who can talk to the press, understands the press. She looks
Yeah.
great. I mean, why not? But you got 30 seconds here, Carl.
Well, I know Claire. She's beautiful on the inside and the outside. A very decent person. She was a good reporter. We covered the Clinton campaign together. She and I wrote a column, an alternating column for George Magazine. You may remember that, Andy.
I remember George Magazine.
Tom does.
Jeez,
It was on
I
the White
remember.
House. And when John F. Kennedy Jr. died, it was a real blow. I knew him, and it was a just shocking thing. And some people who cared about the magazine tried to keep it together. And so they asked me and Claire to write alternating months column from the White House. And I just found her just a terrific colleague, and I wish her all the best.
Yeah, well, good. Well, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl, but don't go away. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Fang. He is an independent journalist and a contributor to Real Clear Investigations, and he has a piece for RCI that's up on Real Clear Politics this morning. Lee, good to see you. Good to have you.
Hey, Tom, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so I love this piece. You got your hands on some internal documents from a group called Way to Win, and they were, I guess, part of the social media influencing campaign that went on during the election. Everyone remembers the summer of Brat, right? With Charlie XCX and all of that, when Kamala got in and there was this big surge. And as is the case with a lot of our politics, things aren't always as they seem. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. This is a piece that looks at the efforts by a group of Democratic donors to fund social media influencers. These are internet personalities that post on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Twitch, some of the other big social platforms. And this was a lot of money. This was close to $10 million in undisclosed cash. This is money that was not disclosed on the Federal Election Commission website or in any other kind of public disclosure website, pretty much secretly funneled into the election last year. And it was to uplift Democrats. Primarily, it started out as a fund to support Joe Biden. And when there was the switch last summer to Kamala Harris, it was really the kind of cultural cachet, the attempt to bring in young voters to make Biden or Kamala seem cool. So a lot of those videos that appeared last summer, right after the nomination went to Kamala, that depicted her as like almost like a sex symbol, using Charlie XCX's Brat album, synced music to Kamala memes to make her appear as kind of a Gen Z icon. Some of that money, some of those influencers were receiving money from the secret fund. They were not disclosing. They were really just attempting to connect Kamala to voters using these undisclosed cash.
So, I mean, there's so many interesting nuggets in this piece that I want to get to. One of them is it looks like they wanted to raise about 50 million, but could only raise 10 through their donor network. So it seems like there wasn't as much enthusiasm for this. And maybe you can speak to that a little bit. And then you talk about this idea that these groups, they're funneling money. Do we know who got paid what, or is that not disclosed? It just sort of goes into the payments go out the door, and we have no idea exactly who the influencers were who got paid.
We have some idea, but no, it doesn't give a exact like dollar to influencer figure. And these were memos that came out right after the election, kind of giving a summary of their efforts to their donors. That's kind of the crux of our piece. But it does provide some answers. There was an attempt to connect Kamala to Black men and to the Black community. So this group of donors financed a whole series of podcasts, of YouTube talk shows, of other kind of YouTube sketches to a group called Watering Hole Media. And, these were kind of cultural identity politics media shows. They produced a lot of content claiming that there was a lot of a enthusiasm for Kamala Harris from the Black community. But if you look at the view count, if you look at kind of the social metrics, basically no one tuned into this. Now, in terms of some of the other big social media influencers, there's a couple buckets. There were many kind of political influencers, people who, you might not be surprised that they were tied to this campaign, people who post a lot about politics or policy or campaigns. And, a lot of those folks who showed up at the Democratic National Convention, some of those folks were paid through their management agencies. There are special agencies that help place products with social media influencers. And there are even more specialized agencies that specialize in politics. So Palette Management was one of them, Ryegrass, another one. And these agencies kind of acted as the in-between between these big Democratic donors and these individual influencers. And one other bucket I want to mention too is that there was a very conscious effort to connect with non-political influencers. These are lifestyle bloggers, mommy bloggers, travel bloggers, people who you wouldn't expect to see posting policy or campaign related content. And that was the intent, that they were hoping to seed pro Kamala messages, talking points, actual phrases that they had kind of poll tested and used AI to kind of find the most persuasive arguments. And they found unlikely influencers, these micro influencers, these mommy bloggers, and they connected with them to help promote and seed kind of covert pro-Kamala messaging. So, it was a sophisticated effort. It's not clear if it worked. As I mentioned, some of these efforts, no one tuned in. Some of their clips did go viral. Some of these kind of Charlie XCX and kind of sketches slamming Donald Trump as a white supremacist. Some of this did get some engagement, but top line, you got to look back on this effort. This was a historic election where young voters dropped out of the Democratic coalition, especially young men, Black men, Latino voters. There were big losses with the key constituency groups that they targeted with this campaign.
We're speaking with Lee Fang. He's an independent journalist and a contributor to Real Clear Investigations. Lee, you mentioned that they spent a lot of money here trying to reach these voters. And, the whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, they could have saved a lot of money by just actually going on Joe Rogan, right? Remember, they free and probably would have reached, millions and millions of folks and maybe even, converted a few.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head here, because if you kind of, as I was reading through these documents, it's kind of a head scratcher. They're trying to reinvent the wheel where the wheel is already out there. There are already popular podcasts that there's been some other reporting on this, that some of the younger members of the Kamala campaign, some of her advisors, maybe for cultural reasons, negative polarization reasons, they didn't want her to go on the big podcast. They were seen as hostile audiences or seen as places where she might receive, tough questions, or simply they were associated with cultural ideas that were outside of the Democratic tent. And Kamala really avoided a lot of interviews, a lot of kind of more larger platforms. So they tried to create their own platforms that nobody watched. That's essentially what happened here. It's also just, maybe part of this has to do with the messenger, Kamala was a very awkward candidate, someone who'd really trapezed through the Democratic establishment with a lot of kind of easy races in California, and then gets nominated without any debate, without any democratic process. So, how could you kind of put lipstick on a pig here and make her the popular kind of populist candidate? It was a very difficult task to be done.
This group, Way to Win, as you said, this post-election analysis that they did, they end by saying, well, if more people had tuned in, like she would have won if they had just gotten more eyeballs on these things. I guess, are there lessons learned here for Democrats and potentially for Republicans, because they engage in this kind of behavior too? This
Yeah.
Obviously you can't ignore social media. You gotta. Although Republicans seem to, with Trump and the way that he went on Rogan and all these other podcasts, they seem to have much more of an easy time figuring it out. But again, she spent $1.5 billion. We know it was 10 million plus just on this tiny little piece of social influencers. What can they learn here? How can they do it better next time around? I mean, because as you said, it's not clear at all that they got any return on their investment here.
Yeah, that's right. It's not clear to me. I mean, I think part of this is just a lesson that you can't buy authenticity, and what sells on social media is, being yourself. It's having like an organic, authentic conversation with someone. I mean, that's what makes a great podcast, when you are vulnerable and kind of, what was, I think, very influential for Donald Trump is when he went on the Theo Von podcast, another one of those large podcasts like Joe Rogan, and he talked about his brother's death, his brother's suicide, and struggles with alcohol and addiction. That was a side of Donald Trump that I don't think voters saw a lot of, and I thought that was very powerful. Kamala could never really open up in the same way. I mean, there were a lot of questions about her authenticity and her attempt to kind of manufacture authenticity through this millions and millions of dollars in kind of organic looking TikTok sketches and comedy reels, all designed to make her seem like someone who she wasn't. I don't think there was an authentic self for her to, make herself out to be this, Charlie XCX rave pop icon. It wasn't real. So perhaps that's the kind of simple message. And the kind of sub message is, we've got a big problem in America with this undisclosed campaign cash. You watch a television ad or a radio ad that's sponsored for a campaign, you've got those like 3 seconds at the end telling you who sponsored it. None of this was disclosed. It happens on both sides. It seems to be happening a little bit more on the Democratic side, but it's happening on both sides with no disclosure.
All right, we will leave it there. Lee Fang, with a great piece on Real Clear Investigations. Please check it out. Lee, thanks for your time.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me.
All right, and that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Andy and Carl, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.